Why do we judge? Because all we need is 6 more inches. In the summer of 2000, my grandparents, Bonnie and Norm, went on a trip to Australia to visit their youngest daughter, Amber, who was traveling with the Brigham Young folk dance team. While she was there, she became ill with strep throat, and she was admitted to the hospital and given 2 large doses of penicillin. Hours later, the bacteria was too strong and for the penicillin and got into her bloodstream. The doctors told their family that she had a 2% chance of living while she was on life support, so they all came and rushed to her aid. Although the doctors saved her life, because of the poor circulation in her arms and her legs during this ordeal, they had to amputate her legs below the knee and a few of her fingertips. Fast forward to a few years ago, my grandmother was on one of her trips back from her prosthetic legs. She took them off in her car and used the hand controls on her BMW. She thought she was going to be able to get home with the amount of gas she had, but she ran out in 5 o'clock heat with crazy traffic. So there she sat, frantically calling every number she knew, while drivers honked their horns, screamed, and yelled at her. You may think, why doesn't she just clip on her prosthetic legs and get out of the car? Well, let me tell you something. You can't just clip on prosthetics. You actually have to get into them. There are many different layers you need to put on, and then the actual prosthetic, so it becomes a very long process. So there she sat, helpless, trapped, with drivers screaming at her. Were these people horrible people? No. They just didn't have the whole picture. Let me tell you a second story. The perspective in this story is what really caught me. Felipe Morales was in Washington, D.C. in 2005, sightseeing. He was walking by the Ronald Reagan Center, which is known for many beggars, when he heard a voice that said, "Can you help me?" He turned around and saw a blind elderly woman. As what he described as a natural instinct, he pulled some loose change out of his pocket and handed it to the old woman. The old woman smiled and replied, "I don't need your money. I just need help finding the post office." This man, Felipe, had prejudged this old woman and assumed that she was begging. Why do we judge in this way so often? Nobody likes being judged. But is it possible for us to look inside ourselves and recognize the times that we do prejudge? Felipe realized the mistake he'd made right away. In the end, he helped the old woman to the post office and gained a priceless lesson. He learned not to assume that people who are asking for help on the streets are asking for money. Felipe is a pretty incredible man if he was able to do this so quickly. We can change our examples in this way by listening to those who trust us enough to ask us a simple question. Too often in society, we assume things about each other. Whether or not we're assuming, we have most likely been judgmental in a more or less negative way. In a book called Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, he talks about a psychological test that was conducted called the implicit association test. In this test, you would first have to sort faces into categories of black and white. Next, you would sort emotions, happy, sad, angry, and kind, into the categories of good and bad. Thirdly, you would sort the faces and emotions on the same screen together. They found that people have a strong prejudgment as black people of being angry and rude. In fact, Malcolm Gladwell says that 80% of those who have ever taken this test end up having pre-right associations, meaning that it takes them considerably longer to put good words into the black category than what it does to link bad things with black people. This is something that these are long-held judgments that we need to pull apart. It's hard, but we can do it, and learn to be the example for the youth who are growing up in this culture of judgment. Now back to my grandmother. Today, some 36 million Americans suffer from some form of handicap. 80% of Americans will experience some disability in their lifetime. This makes it necessary for us to understand and appreciate the barriers that they must surmount and the contributions that they must make to our society. My grandmother is one of those people who suffers from a form of disability. She gets prejudged all the time. We need to bring down those barriers that are held against disabled people, and so that we can hold each other up, not tear each other down. I love my grandmother so much, but I can't stop her from receiving unkind judgment. Society nowadays is so used to judging each other, going on our phones, opening Instagram, and rating people in our heads. That's what all the drivers did. They saw a nicely dressed lady in a nice car and assumed that she was just going to sit there because she was better than everybody else. No, all she needed was one person to go and help her, one person to move her car to the side of the road, or one person to call for additional help. But that's not what happened. I'm here to tell you that we can be the example in society to learn to withhold judgment. By doing so, we can all be united through our struggles, to learn to uplift each other and support each other through our struggles. Today's youth is just learning to set examples. I hope the example being set is one of love and humility for each other. We also have to understand that sometimes we don't have the whole picture. We just need a little bit more perspective. In many cases, just 6 more inches. Perhaps we can see the world through someone else's eyes. Thank you.